How's it, everybody? This is going to be the second um, installment of the Journey series. So, the stuff that I talked about in the first one well, about not being believed. And this changed everything. And so what happened was when I was little, and this was back before we even lived on Kaha Street. We were living in the Bay Area, and we were little. And my dad used to say to me every morning, he said the same thing every morning. And he'd say, "Good morning. Did you sleep good? Did you dream about me?" Every morning. and I never did, And so I'd say, no. No. And so he'd say, "Oh, okay. Well, what did you dream about?" And I always dreamt that I was flying. And so I tell him, I dreamt I was flying. Oh, that's nice, And then every morning, same question, same answer for the most part, because it happened all the time. And what's funny is it started on the mainland, but where I was flying to was actually in Kailua. But I didn't know it was in Kailua until I got much older. Much older. So what happened was, this was a very common dream. I dreamed it a lot. And so one night, well, it wasn't even a night. One morning, my dad said to me when we were on Kaha Street, he said to me, same thing. And I said, no, I dreamt I was flying. And he said, he goes, well, he said something like, well, you fly a lot, don't you? And he says, well, what were you flying? And I said, oh, I was flying. And he said, no, but were you flying an airplane? Were you flying a helicopter? What were you flying? And I said, no, I was flying. I was flying. And he'd say, well, he said, what do you mean? How do you fly? And I told him, I said, I jump up into the air and I put my arms out and I kick my feet like I'm swimming and I fly through the air. And then he was like, oh, okay. And I guess he didn't think anything about it, probably just figured. I was pretty young, when it started. But when he asked me that, I was about 8 at the time. And so he was just like, oh, okay. And he probably didn't believe me, He just probably thought I was having these dreams, But one night, I remember being shaken awake. I remember my parents shaking me awake. And what they used to do is, before they would go to sleep at nighttime, after we had already been in bed and asleep, they would come in and they would check on us. And, a lot of times they would kiss us, and then they'd go to bed. So apparently they had done this that night. And I was burning up. And my parents couldn't arouse me. So apparently they were shaking me and yelling at me, Susie, Susie. I didn't hear them. I didn't feel them. And then I guess at some point I kind of came back into awareness and I woke up and they were panicked. And apparently they had been trying to wake me up for a long time because my fever was so high. They were really, really scared. So they get me. And my dad has now run to the phone. Once I'm woken up, my dad has run to the phone and he's calling the emergency room. And my mother is, she was bringing me like cold compresses and stuff, trying to get my fever down, and she had given me baby aspirin and, just trying to get this fever down. And so then my dad gets off the phone and he comes in and he says, you got to put her in a bath. You got to put her in a cold bath and get her temperature down. So that's what they did. My mother put me in the bathtub, and as they were splashing water, she was trying to bring my temperature down, and, and it was freezing cold, and I was crying, and I remember it really well. And then my mother leaving and then coming back and saying, okay, Dad's going to take you to the emergency room. So she got me out of the bathtub, got me dressed and everything like that. And we were Kaiser members. And Kaiser then was right next to the Ilikai back then. And the Ilikai is right at the entrance to Waikiki. So we were going to drive over the pulley to go to the emergency room. And so my mom got me dressed and everything. And my dad and I went in the car, headed over the pulley. So while we're driving there to the hospital, my dad starts talking about how, oh gosh, it was so hard to wake you up, and did you hear us? We were shaking you. And I said, no, because I didn't at all. And he said, well, we shook you and we were yelling for you and you didn't wake up. And he said, you didn't hear us? And I kept asking that. And I said, no, I didn't hear you. And I told him, I said, I was flying because I was flying. And he said, oh, okay. So he just left it at that, We go to the hospital and they treat me and everything like that. And so later on, we're driving back over the pulley to go home. And my dad says to me, now my fever is down and everything. And they gave me penicillin or something like that. But so now we're driving back over. And my dad says to me, he says, he brought it up again. He said, you really scared us, because your fever was so high and we couldn't wake you up. And I said, well, I was flying. I said it again. And he said, well, where were you flying? And I think he was he wasn't irritated with me, but he was I kept going back to that. And he said, well, where were you flying? And I said, well, I went to Auntie Pat's house. And Auntie Pat is my mom's first cousin. She lived a couple of blocks up. And her and my mom were pretty close, and Auntie Pat was always at our house, or my mom was over. She was just, the auntie that we always saw. And I told him, I said, well, I was at Auntie Pat's house. And I remember the look on his face, and he looked away, and he looked at me, and it was like, what? And I said, I was at Auntie Pat's house. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I flew to Auntie Pat's house. And I said, he said, well, what'd you do at Auntie Pat's house? And I said, well, I just went over there and I saw Mom and Auntie Pat. And they were sitting at the kitchen table and they were fighting. And then my dad's eyes got really big and he said, they were fighting? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, they were arguing. And I don't remember what it was that they were arguing about. And I don't even know if I even told him. I may not have known. I just still remember them fighting. And I told him where they were. He said they were sitting at Auntie Pat's kitchen table. And, they had drinks and they were smoking and they were arguing. And so my dad just sort of stopped with the questions. And then we got back home and they put me to bed. Well, apparently my mother had gone to Auntie Pat's house that night and they did get into an argument, kind of heated argument. But she didn't tell me that. And then the next morning, my mom, came up to me and she said, so Dad said you were flying? And I said, yeah. No, she knew what I said to my dad, or she wouldn't even have brought it up. And so she said, where did you go? What were you, and I told her. And she didn't act surprised. So, I mean, obviously, too, my dad had told her. So, ever since then, my mom sort of, and years later, she told me that it was exactly what I said. That's exactly what happened at Auntie Pat's house. So, but it was at that point that my mom believed when I told her that things had showed up and I couldn't explain. That's when it all switched. So that's the story of, well, that's part of the journey. Flying. Allah.